You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron, live with Ethan Hristodoulou.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Hristodoulou, and to my LA Rams fans, we are discussing your team this afternoon, diving into some of the things that I would like to see or expect to see this Rams team work on as they work their way through the duration of the offseason. We've already seen some key hires made by the team, but there is a lot of work to do in terms of roster adjustments that are going to have to be made here at $15 million over the cap. Work has got to be done. So comment down below. Let me know what you want to see from your Rams team here. Let me know some things that you maybe expect to see or are hoping to at least see this Rams team work on. But we'll dive right in and just kind of rattle off some of the priorities that I have for this team here. And the first one is a pretty obvious one. Offensive line is going to need a bit of an overhaul with some aging veterans reaching fairly close to the end of their deals. I think we are all in agreement here that there has got to be some sort of reworking of the offensive line, adding some youth in there, getting some depth pieces along just anywhere realistically. One of the biggest things that I think really hurt the Rams this year, especially in the earlier portion of the season before everyone really started to get hurt, was just kind of the lack of protection that the Rams could put around Matthew Stafford. And I'm not going to sit here and say that he gets hurt because of that, but ultimately him going down with an injury and then trying to, scrape through the rest of the season there, all hope kind of lost once your star quarterback goes down, especially with an offensive line that could not really support the team. Obviously, some magic happening with Baker Mayfield at the end of the season there, but don't really think Baker Mayfield's the answer and is solving your issues. I'm very sure in the fact that Matthew Stafford is going to be around at least for the foreseeable future, at least basically what he's been saying, and that kind of rolls into what my next point is, in basically just ensure that Matthew Stafford is good to go. He's dealing with that back injury, and from the sounds of it, it seemed serious enough that, shutting him down for a decent portion of the season and getting the surgery done was necessary, but you need to make sure that Matthew Stafford really is going to be good to go and be able to play when you kick things off next year. If not, considering a potential heir apparent to the quarterback spot might be something in the cards. I don't necessarily know how this is going to work out here. Like I said, Matthew Stafford sounds pretty sure of himself that he's going to keep playing. He said he wasn't planning on retiring this offseason, but he does have somewhat of an injury history and a back injury history at that. I am a little bit concerned with that. I'm hoping for the best. I'm a big Matthew Stafford fan. I rooted for him the whole way into that Super Bowl run just a couple of years ago, but there is definitely going to be some concern there, and ensuring that he's healthy and ready to go for the beginning of next season is going to be key for this team's success going into next year. And if you feel like there's a slight possibility that he's not going to be around, we'll maybe trying to keep Baker Mayfield around for at least the early portion of the season. See if maybe you can scrape together some of what you got towards the end of the season there when he was starting for you, get some of the good, not necessarily the bad out of him, or maybe looking elsewhere and maybe finding a guy you could try to build around and maybe he ends up being your development talent. I don't really know what the answer is there because it's kind of a question mark at this point, but making sure Matthew Stafford is ready to roll for next season and making sure you have a backup plan in case he is not is going to be key for this team next year. And the salary cap, I already kind of mentioned it, being $15 million over the cap, and you have a lot of bloated contracts over there with some really top-end talent. Tough choices are going to have to be made this offseason. Whether you let players like Ashawn Robinson or maybe Taylor Rapp walk during free agency, or, you have to cut a guy or two here and there just because they're cap casualties and, you can maybe save a few dollars as opposed to keeping them around. You could spread the dead cap money over a couple of years so it makes things not hurt as much. Or contract restructures. Something has got to be done. I know everyone jokes about the Rams having unlimited dollars and, the salary cap's not real, but at the end of the day, it is to a point, and you got to get yourself under that number. And there's only so much, kind of magician work that these salary guys can do. At some point, a player or two is going to have to take a hit and be taken off the roster and either traded away or released, whatever it may be, or allowed to walk, like I mentioned, in free agency when that opens up. Something is going to have to give eventually. Just ask the New Orleans Saints. They've been playing that salary cap game, I think, more than just about anybody, and it feels like they're like $70 million over the cap every single year the last few years, and while they do work their way down and get under the cap eventually, they're typically losing out on guys. And I don't necessarily think, especially based on the situation where the Saints are right now, that's not necessarily the best way to do business. I don't think playing that work and just continually pushing money back over the years is necessarily the greatest idea. I think you want to try to work within that cap frame and stop just pushing things back and, we'll deal with it later. Let's try to manage this a little more smartly and think more so about the present and the future and not just about the present here. But those are kind of the three big things I'm looking at for this team this offseason. But let's dive into free agency. I don't necessarily think that this is going to be the sexiest of free agencies for the Rams here. Like I said, you're dealing with some strain on the cap, and I don't expect them to be very large spenders in this free agency period. Now, I could totally be wrong about that. Obviously, I could be wrong about everything I say on here, but just based off their situation and where they are right now, it doesn't really make sense to me to see them going out and, chasing after some of the big money free agents that you would have maybe seen them grabbing the last couple of years as they were really pushing for a Super Bowl opportunity. I'm looking at this free agency period for them as more of a let's accrue some depth pieces, some younger talent that's, maybe on the rise or has shown some promise in other areas, but has just been let go because of the same situation, cap casualties, whatever it may be. Assuming you work your way under the cap and you have some money to play with, I think focusing on those guys where you're dishing out like $2 or $3 million for the year to those guys in money. Look for the depth guys on the O-line. Look for some depth in the secondary. It doesn't really matter to me per se where they're spending this money, but the Rams are a team that I look at and I feel are very top heavy, and they need to really fill in some of the holes in the areas where you're essentially spelling those guys that start for you. You need some of that depth, and I just don't really think it makes a lot of sense throwing a ton of money at free agencies. Again, you have a ton of top-end talent already. You just dealt with a lot of really unfortunate injuries last year. This should be the year to try to fill in some of those holes in case something like that does happen again. Hopefully not to the degree of this past season, but you can always expect an injury or two in a key position. So trying to fill in some of those holes that were really glaring and obviously a problem once your starters were going down, that's kind of how I look at free agency for this team. Now, focusing in on the draft, this is where I think a lot of things need to be handled and where you're looking for like some starters in the earlier rounds that you have picks in. This is where key replacements are starting to come in for maybe some of those players you had to let walk or maybe a starter or two you had to cut because of the cap issues. In round 2, I want to see them go after another offensive lineman. I think that's going to be key for the sustained success of this team, and especially for as long as you have Matthew Stafford around. You want to get a little bit younger on that offensive line. It felt like a bunch of aging veterans were on that O-line for the Rams this past year, whether it was during the early portion of the season or as people were getting knocked out through the year. Let's get a little bit younger. Let's find some talent. You should be able to in the second round there. I definitely think it's a possibility, and it's something I would really like to see this team focus on in round number 2. Now, diving into round number 3, this is where I'm thinking best talent available in the secondary. You could definitely use some talent there. As great as Jalen Ramsey is and some of the other people you have there on the defensive side of the ball in that backfield, let's get a little bit younger. Let's find some more talent there. I feel like, again, injuries aplenty for this Rams team, and you were hurting in a lot of ways. Troy Hill is getting old. He's 31, and he's only going to get younger. Again, I talked about Taylor Rapp earlier. You may or may not have to let him walk because of the cap. I don't know if you're going to be able to re-sign him. I'm not sure what the money is that he's going to command, but that is a possibility. Obviously not something you maybe want to see happen, but it is a possibility. This is where you're looking for like that best secondary player available, a guy that you can, at worst, he's someone that maybe takes a few weeks during the season to kind of get himself really up to speed, but can be a significant player in your group. Or it's somebody that maybe by chance ends up being a day one starter for you and is somebody who can play a significant amount of snaps right out of the gates, shows some promise in the preseason and in training camp beforehand, someone that's going to get going. That's what you're aiming for, at least in my opinion, for that third round area. When you're looking into 4 through 7, at this point now, you're digging for those diamonds in the rough, and I really hope that your scouts have done their homework on those later rounds. I think that with this team, again, kind of best player available, you're looking for the best athletes you can find that you feel, because the Rams have a good coaching staff over there. I trust the Rams more than a lot of teams in terms of coaching. You're looking for extremely talented guys physically that you can mold into the players you need to be, or you're looking for really smart, savvy guys who really understand the game. Maybe they're not necessarily the most athletically or physically imposing guys, but they're guys that can get it and get it quickly, and you can get them up to speed, and you can trust them to be on the field field, even if it's just for a decent amount of snaps, if they're popping in for 20, 30, 40% of the game, maybe not necessarily starting, but you're looking for those guys who know the game in and out. One of those two. I really have a hard time believing you're going to find starters. Maybe somebody starts a player or two from these rounds just due to necessity. Again, injuries always happen, but these are those rounds where you got to find those diamonds in the rough. And again, you're focusing on the elite athletic guys that you can find, or you're looking for the guys that really understand the game and they have the high football IQ that you can trust to be in important situations for you or in those rotational roles, but be effective as well. That's kind of how I look at this draft, just from like a quick little window, if you will. But that's how I'm kind of looking at the Rams offseason. Again, offensive line needs to be rebuilt. You definitely got to make sure you're hitting on some of those later picks, but I think that a lot of your key replacements for guys you may lose come from the draft this year, and free agency is all about just filling out some depth. This is a top-heavy team, and I want to see them be able to not rely on all those starters to have to play a full 17-game season, because odds are that's not really the case, and that's just not typically how it works. But let me know, my Rams fans, what you guys think in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear your opinions like I mentioned early on. That's it for me. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.